London, 1863. The chandeliers of Ashford House cast their golden glow over the cream of London society. Ladies in silk gowns drifted across polished floors like exotic birds, while gentlemen in tailored evening wear exchanged pleasantries and business propositions in hushed tones. The annual Ashford Ball marked the pinnacle of the London season, an occasion where reputations were made, marriages arranged, and fortunes quietly negotiated. Lady Victoria Pembroke, the self-appointed guardian of societal propriety, stood near the entrance with her loyal circle of companions. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, especially not the sudden hush that fell over the gathering as the footman announced the next arrival. The Countess Rebecca Stewart. The announcement rippled through the ballroom. Heads turned, conversations halted, and fans fluttered with increased vigor. The woman who entered stood perfectly still for a moment, allowing the curious eyes of society to take her measure. Countess Rebecca Stewart was not what they expected. Her gown of deep burgundy silk was elegant but understated, lacking the ostentatious embellishments favored by those desperate to announce their wealth. Her raven hair was arranged in a sophisticated style that framed her face, a face that held a quiet dignity and an almost imperceptible sadness in her dark, expressive eyes. "A widow, I hear," whispered Lady Pembroke to her companions. "Recently returned from abroad, India perhaps, or was it the Americas?" "Neither," replied her companion, Mrs. Hawthorne. "I heard she was in Italy. Her late husband was the Earl of Westmoreland's second son. Died under mysterious circumstances, they say." How deliciously scandalous, Lady Pembroke's eyes narrowed. And yet she dares show her face at Ashford's ball. How very bold. Across the room, standing slightly apart from the crowd, was a man whose mere presence commanded attention. James Charlemont, the Duke of Harrington, observed the newcomer with calculated interest. At 34, the Duke had earned his reputation as London's most formidable bachelor. His dark hair and striking features had broken countless hearts, but it was his shrewd business acumen that had doubled his already substantial fortune and made him both feared and respected throughout England. "Who is she?" he asked his companion, Lord Edward Blackwood, without taking his eyes off the Countess. "Rebecca Stewart, widow of William Stewart, been abroad for nearly 3 years, returned to claim her late husband's estate in Berkshire." Edward provided the information with practiced efficiency. As the Duke's closest friend, he was accustomed to his sudden interests in beautiful women. "And what do we know of her character?" James continued, watching as Rebecca politely acknowledged Lady Ashford's welcome. "Very little. Keeps to herself. Declined most invitations until this one. The gossips have been working overtime, of course. Some say she fled England after her husband's death due to scandal. Others claim she was in mourning. No one seems to know the truth." A slight smile played at the corner of the Duke's mouth. "A mystery, then." "James," Edward's voice took on a warning tone, "she doesn't appear to be your usual type. There's something different about her." "Precisely what makes her interesting," James replied, straightening his cravat. "The season has been insufferably dull thus far." As Rebecca moved through the crowd, she felt the weight of scrutiny upon her. She had anticipated this, of course. 3 years away had not dulled her memory of London society's voracious appetite for novelty and scandal. She kept her chin lifted, her smile polite but reserved. The whispers followed her like shadows. "They say her husband gambled away their fortune before his death. I heard she has a child hidden away somewhere. My cousin swears she was seen in the company of an Italian count." Rebecca had learned to let such words wash over her like rain. None of these people knew her truth, and she intended to keep it that way. "Countess Stewart," a deep voice interrupted her thoughts. "May I have the honor of this dance?" She turned to find herself looking up at the Duke of Harrington. His reputation had preceded him even to the remote Italian village where she had sought refuge. Handsome, wealthy, and utterly merciless, both in business and in his dealings with women. His dark eyes held an intensity that unsettled her. "Your Grace," she curtsied slightly, "I'm afraid I must decline. I do not dance." Instead of appearing offended, a gleam of interest lit his eyes. "Not at all? Or merely not with me?" "Not at present," she clarified, maintaining her composure. "I have only recently returned to society." "All the more reason to announce your return properly," he countered smoothly. "One dance, Countess. Surely your period of mourning allows for that small pleasure." Rebecca studied him, recognizing the practiced charm that had undoubtedly swayed many women before her. "My mourning is my own affair, Your Grace, as are my pleasures." She offered a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "If you'll excuse me." She moved away, leaving the Duke staring after her with undisguised surprise and growing fascination. In all his years navigating the marriage market, few women had ever declined his invitations, and none had done so with such unapologetic directness. From across the room, Lady Elizabeth Harwick observed the exchange with interest. As Rebecca's childhood friend, and one of the few people who knew the true circumstances of her time abroad, she had worried about her friend's return to London. Seeing her hold her own against the notorious Duke offered some reassurance. "You've made quite an impression," Elizabeth murmured when Rebecca joined her by the refreshment table. "Turning down the Duke of Harrington is practically unheard of." Rebecca accepted a glass of champagne. "I didn't come to London to become another conquest in his collection." "Why did you come back?" Elizabeth asked gently. "Your letters were always vague. You could have stayed in Italy forever." Rebecca's gaze drifted toward the tall windows, where rain had begun to streak the glass. "It was time. One cannot run forever, even when running feels safer than standing still." She took a small sip of champagne. "Besides, there are matters concerning William's estate that require my attention." Elizabeth wanted to press further, but years of friendship had taught her when Rebecca's defences were firmly in place. Instead, she changed the subject. "Lady Pembroke has been watching you like a hawk all evening. I suspect you'll be the primary topic at her tea tomorrow." "Let them talk," Rebecca replied. "They'll tire of me soon enough when they discover I have no scandals to offer." But across the room, the Duke of Harrington had not taken his eyes off her. For the first time in years, he had encountered a woman who didn't immediately succumb to his charm, a woman who carried herself with quiet dignity rather than desperate coquetry. The thrill of the challenge surged through him. "Edward," he said to his friend, "find out everything you can about Countess Stuart. Everything." Lord Blackwood sighed. "James, perhaps this time you should simply leave well enough alone. She seems to value her privacy." The Duke smiled, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's profile. "Privacy is a luxury in our world, my friend, and I intend to know exactly what secrets she's keeping behind those remarkable eyes." As the evening progressed, Rebecca navigated the treacherous waters of society with careful precision. She answered personal questions with polite deflection and engaged in conversation only long enough to avoid appearing rude. When the clock struck 11, she made her excuses to Lady Ashford and prepared to depart. As her carriage was called, she felt a presence beside her in the entrance hall. "Leaving so soon, Countess?" The Duke had materialized at her elbow. "The night is still young." "For some, perhaps," she replied. "I find these gatherings rather taxing after so long away." He studied her face in the softer light of the hall. "Where exactly were you away to, if I might ask?" "You may ask, Your Grace, but that doesn't guarantee an answer." Her response was gentle but firm. The footman announced her carriage had arrived. As she prepared to leave, the Duke spoke again, his voice lower. "We shall meet again, Countess Stuart. London is surprisingly small when one knows how to navigate it." Rebecca met his gaze directly. "London is exactly as large or small as one wishes it to be, Your Grace. Good night." As her carriage pulled away from Ashford House, Rebecca finally allowed her carefully maintained composure to falter. She leaned back against the plush seat and closed her eyes. Her return to London had been necessary, but perilous. There were secrets she had buried in Italy, secrets that must remain there if she was to reclaim any semblance of a life in England. The Duke of Harrington's interest was an unforeseen complication. Men like him were dangerous not because of their cruelty, but because of their persistence. He would not stop until he uncovered whatever mystery he believed she harbored. "Home, my lady?" her driver called through the small window. Rebecca opened her eyes, gazing at the rain-slicked streets of London passing by. "Yes, Henry, take me home." But as the carriage wound its way through the foggy streets, she wondered if England would ever truly feel like home again, or if she had forever destined herself to remain an outsider, watching life from behind a carefully constructed facade. In his own carriage, the Duke of Harrington contemplated his next move. Countess Stuart presented a unique puzzle, one he was determined to solve. What he couldn't yet admit, even to himself, was that his interest went beyond his usual pursuit of conquest. Something in her eyes had reached past his carefully cultivated cynicism and touched a part of him he had long thought dormant. "Intriguing," he murmured to himself as London's misty landscape slipped by his carriage window. "Most intriguing indeed." The morning after the Ashford ball dawned grey and damp, a typical London day that seemed to mirror Rebecca's mood. She sat at the writing desk in her modest but elegant townhouse on Chester Street, reviewing correspondence that had accumulated during her absence. 3 years away had not diminished the obligations of her position, and William's estate matters had become increasingly complex. Her lady's maid, Sophie, who had accompanied her from Italy, entered with a tray of tea. "More invitations arrived this morning, my lady," Sophie announced, setting down the tray. "It seems your appearance at the Ashford ball has made quite an impression." Rebecca sighed, accepting a cup of steaming tea. "I had hoped to re-enter society quietly. If I may be so bold, my lady, that was perhaps an unrealistic expectation. A beautiful young widow with a countess title was never going to pass unnoticed." Rebecca smiled at Sophie's frankness. In Italy, their relationship had evolved beyond that of mistress and servant into something closer to friendship. The isolation of their small villa near Florence and the circumstances that had driven them there had dissolved many of the rigid barriers of English propriety. "Lady Elizabeth Harwick has invited you to tea this afternoon," Sophie continued, sorting through the invitations. "And Lady Pembroke has requested your presence at her musical evening tomorrow. I'll accept Elizabeth's invitation, of course, but I think I shall decline Lady Pembroke's. I've had quite enough scrutiny for 1 week." Rebecca picked up the letter from her solicitor. "I must visit Mr. Ainsworth today. There are matters regarding Briarwood that require my attention." Briarwood Estate had been William's family home in Berkshire, passed down through generations of Stuarts. After William's death, the property had fallen into legal limbo, partly due to her absence and partly due to William's substantial debts, which had only come to light after his passing. "Will you be claiming the estate, my lady?" Sophie asked, her voice careful. They both knew what returning to Briarwood would mean, facing the memories of her brief, troubled marriage. "I must. It's all that remains of William's legacy, and I owe it to his family name to restore it if possible." Rebecca set down her teacup with resolution. "Besides, I cannot stay in London indefinitely. The expense alone would be prohibitive." Later that morning, Rebecca's carriage brought her to the offices of Ainsworth & Son Solicitors, located in a respectable building near Lincoln's Inn Fields. Mr. Ainsworth, a gentleman in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, received her with evident relief. "Countess Stuart, what a pleasure to see you in person after all our correspondence. Please, take a seat." He gestured to a comfortable chair before his desk. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Mr. Ainsworth. I'm eager to resolve the situation with Briarwood." The solicitor's expression grew serious as he retrieved a substantial file. "I wish I had better news, my lady. The estate's financial situation is even more precarious than we initially believed. The late Earl's debts were considerable." Rebecca had suspected as much. William had been charming and aristocratic, but his gambling habits had strained their marriage from the beginning. "How considerable?" "Without additional funds, I fear Briarwood may have to be sold to satisfy the creditors." The news, though expected, still struck her like a physical blow. "That cannot happen, Mr. Ainsworth. Briarwood has been in the Stuart family for 5 generations. I understand your attachment, but unless you can raise approximately £5,000 within the next 3 months, I see no alternative." Rebecca's mind raced. Her own modest inheritance from her father had sustained her in Italy, but it was nowhere near sufficient to cover such a sum. There must be some other solution. "There is one possibility," Mr. Ainsworth said hesitantly. "Lord Richard Stuart, your late husband's cousin, has expressed interest in the property. He has offered to clear the debts in exchange for ownership." "Richard?" Rebecca's surprise was evident. William's cousin had shown little interest in family matters during William's lifetime. "Why would he want Briarwood now?" "Coal, my lady. Preliminary surveys suggest there may be valuable deposits beneath the north pastures. Lord Richard has recently invested heavily in mining ventures." Rebecca felt a surge of indignation. "So he would turn a family estate into a coal mine?" "I believe that is his intention, yes. That is entirely unacceptable." She straightened her posture, her resolve hardening. I need time, Mr. Ainsworth. Surely we can delay the creditors somewhat. The solicitor looked sympathetic. I've already negotiated one extension. The most I can offer is 3 months, and that's only because your family name still carries some weight. But after that, he spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. 3 months will have to suffice. Rebecca rose to her feet. Please draw up whatever papers are necessary to prevent Lord Richard from taking action in the meantime. I will find a way to save Briarwood. As she left the solicitor's office, Rebecca's mind was so preoccupied that she nearly collided with a tall figure on the steps. Countess Stuart, the familiar deep voice sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. What a fortunate coincidence. The Duke of Harrington stood before her, impeccably dressed in a dark coat and top hat. His expression suggested that their meeting was anything but coincidental. Your Grace, she acknowledged with a slight nod, I find it difficult to believe in such remarkable coincidences. A smile played at his lips. Perhaps fortunate planning would be more accurate. I happen to hear you had business in this part of town today. Rebecca's eyebrow arched. You're having me followed? Not followed, merely observed. London can be dangerous for a lady alone. I assure you, I've navigated far more perilous situations than London's legal district at midday. She attempted to step around him, but he moved slightly to block her path. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, he continued, undeterred. Or rather, our lack of proper conversation. I believe we started on the wrong footing. Did we? I thought I made my position quite clear. Indeed. Which is why I'm here to offer a truce. Allow me to escort you to Lady Elizabeth's tea this afternoon. Rebecca's surprise must have shown on her face, because his smile widened. Yes, I know of your invitation. Lady Elizabeth is my second cousin, though we rarely acknowledge the connection. How very thorough your observations are, she replied coolly. However, I must decline. I prefer to make my own way. The Duke studied her face, noting the tension around her eyes and the slight pallor of her complexion. You've received troubling news from your solicitor. It wasn't a question, and his perception unsettled her. My affairs are my own concern, Your Grace. Perhaps they're a concern we might share. His voice lowered. I have some experience with legal matters and substantial resources at my disposal. I could be of assistance. For a brief moment, Rebecca was tempted. £5,000 would be nothing to a man of his wealth. But she knew such help would come with expectations she was unwilling to meet. Thank you, but no. Good day, Your Grace. This time, when she moved to pass him, he stepped aside. You're an unusual woman, Countess Stuart, he called after her as she descended the steps. Most people in this city would jump at an offer of my assistance. Rebecca paused and looked back at him. Perhaps that explains why you find my refusal so intriguing. I imagine it happens rarely. She continued to her waiting carriage, feeling his eyes on her back. Once inside, she took a steadying breath. The Duke was dangerous, not just because of his reputation with women, but because he seemed to see through her carefully constructed facade. Such perception could lead to questions she couldn't afford to answer. Her driver turned toward Chester Street, but on impulse Rebecca called out, "Change of plans, Henry. Take me to Paxton's bookshop on Oxford Street first." If she was to find a solution to her financial troubles, she needed information. Specifically, information about potential investments that might yield returns substantial enough to save Briarwood. And for that, she needed books on commerce and finance, subjects William had always dismissed as unsuitable for a lady's delicate mind. Meanwhile, the Duke of Harrington had other matters to attend to. In his study at Harrington House on Grosvenor Square, he received Lord Edward Blackwood's report on Countess Stuart. "She's the daughter of Admiral Charles Sinclair," Edward began, consulting his notes. "Mother died when she was young, educated at home by a series of governesses. Married William Stuart at 19, apparently a love match, though some suggest her father encouraged it due to financial difficulties after his retirement from the Navy." James listened intently, pacing before the fireplace. "And Stuart? What sort of man was he?" "Charming, well-liked, terrible with money, gambling debts primarily. Died in a riding accident 3 years ago at their country estate." "After which she immediately left England," James noted. "Why Italy, specifically?" Edward hesitated. "That's where things become unclear. She has no known family connections there. She took only her lady's maid and lived very quietly in a small villa near Florence. Few visitors, minimal correspondence. Almost as if she were hiding, James mused. Or mourning, Edward countered. Not everyone processes grief publicly. What about her financial situation? Precarious. Stuart left significant debts. The estate in Berkshire, Briarwood, is apparently at risk of being sold to satisfy creditors. She has a modest income from her father, but nothing that would save the property. James stopped pacing, his expression thoughtful. Interesting. And her reputation? Any scandals besides her hasty departure? None that I could uncover. By all accounts, she was a devoted wife despite Stuart's indiscretions. He was unfaithful, James's voice sharpened. Notoriously so, I'm afraid. It was something of an open secret in certain circles. This information stirred an unexpected feeling in James, something close to indignation on Rebecca's behalf. He dismissed it quickly. What of her activities in Italy? Surely a young, beautiful widow didn't live like a nun for 3 years. Edward shifted uncomfortably. James, I must say, this level of investigation feels excessive even for you. The Countess seems to value her privacy. Privacy often conceals secrets, Edward, and secrets are valuable in our world. James poured 2 glasses of brandy, handing one to his friend. Besides, my interest is purely academic. Nothing about your interest in women is academic, Edward replied dryly, accepting the drink. You're hunting, as you always do. I merely suggest that this particular prey might deserve to be left in peace. James smiled thinly. Your concern for the Countess is touching, but I assure you my intentions are honorable. Your intentions are never honorable where beautiful women are concerned. Perhaps it's time for that to change. The words surprised James almost as much as they did Edward, who nearly choked on his brandy. Good heavens, Edward exclaimed. Don't tell me one brief encounter has you contemplating reformation. James laughed, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Hardly, but she presents a unique challenge, and I find myself curious about what lies beneath that composed exterior. Be careful, my friend. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. As the afternoon progressed, Rebecca found herself at Elizabeth's elegant home in Belgravia, where a small gathering of ladies had assembled for tea. To her relief, Lady Pembroke was absent, though several of her closest associates were present, their eyes following Rebecca's every move. You look exhausted, Elizabeth murmured as she poured tea for her friend. Was your meeting with the solicitor that dreadful? Worse than I anticipated, Rebecca admitted quietly. Briarwood may be lost unless I can raise a substantial sum within 3 months. Elizabeth's expression grew concerned. How substantial? £5,000. Oh, Rebecca, Elizabeth set down the teapot. That's significant. Indeed. And to complicate matters, William's cousin Richard is circling like a vulture. He wants to turn Briarwood into a coal mine. Elizabeth's nose wrinkled in distaste. That odious man. I remember him from your wedding. He spent the entire time complaining about the quality of the champagne while drinking excessive amounts of it. Despite her troubles, Rebecca smiled at the accurate description. The very same. I cannot allow him to destroy William's home, Elizabeth. Whatever our marriage became, I owe his family legacy more respect than that. Perhaps you could find an investor, Elizabeth suggested. Someone who might advance the money in exchange for a share in the estate's future profits. That was my thought as well. I've purchased several books on finance and investment opportunities. There must be some venture that could yield sufficient returns in time. Elizabeth hesitated, then leaned closer. There is another option, though I hesitate to suggest it. At this point, I'm open to any possibility. Marriage, Elizabeth said simply. There are several eligible gentlemen who would consider £5,000 a small price for a countess of your beauty and breeding. Rebecca's teacup clattered against its saucer. I have no intention of marrying again, Elizabeth. Not for money, not for security, not for anything. The vehemence in her voice caused several nearby ladies to glance in their direction. Elizabeth lowered her voice further. I understand why you feel that way after William, but not all men are like him. Perhaps not, but I've had quite enough of placing my fate in a man's hands. Rebecca composed herself. Besides, who would want a wife with my complicated history? You underestimate your appeal, Elizabeth replied. Half the gentlemen at the Ashford ball couldn't take their eyes off you, including the Duke of Harrington. At the mention of the Duke, Rebecca's expression closed. That man is the last person I would ever consider. His reputation with women is certainly problematic, Elizabeth conceded, but he is obscenely wealthy, and by all accounts, brilliant in business matters. He's also arrogant, presumptuous, and entirely too used to getting his own way. Rebecca set down her cup with finality. No, Elizabeth, I will find another solution. As if summoned by their conversation, a commotion at the entrance to the drawing room announced a new arrival. The Duke of Harrington strode in, commanding the attention of every lady present. He made a beeline for Elizabeth, bowing gracefully. "Cousin Elizabeth, forgive the intrusion. I was passing by and thought I might pay my respects." Elizabeth's surprise was evident. "Cousin James, what an unexpected pleasure. You haven't graced my humble gatherings in— Has it been 2 years?" "An oversight I deeply regret," he replied smoothly, his eyes finding Rebecca. "Especially when you host such distinguished guests. Countess Stuart, we meet again." Rebecca inclined her head slightly. "Your Grace, what a remarkable coincidence. The second today." The spark of amusement in his eyes confirmed her suspicion that nothing about his appearance was coincidental. "May I join you, ladies?" Without waiting for an answer, he seated himself in the vacant chair beside Rebecca. Elizabeth, clearly torn between amusement and concern for her friend, excused herself to attend to her other guests, leaving Rebecca alone with the Duke. "You're being terribly obvious, Your Grace," Rebecca said quietly, her eyes on the gathering rather than on him. "Am I? How refreshing. I typically pride myself on subtlety. What do you want?" She turned to face him directly, keeping her voice low. "Because this persistent attention is becoming tiresome." Instead of taking offense, he smiled. "Direct and honest. I appreciate that quality. Very well, I'll be equally direct. I want to know you, Countess Stuart. The real you, not the carefully composed facade you present to society." His frankness caught her off guard. "Why?" "Because you intrigue me. You're not like the other women in our circle. You don't simper, you don't flirt, you don't angle for attention or advantage. It's, refreshing. Perhaps I simply have no interest in the games of the ton." "Precisely. And that makes you the most interesting person in London at present." He leaned slightly closer. "I also suspect you're in trouble and could use an ally." Rebecca stiffened. "As I told you earlier, my troubles are my own. Briarwood is in jeopardy," he stated bluntly. "You need £5,000 to save it from William's creditors and his cousin's mining ambitions." She stared at him, shock momentarily breaking through her composure. "How could you possibly know that?" "I make it my business to know things, Countess. Information is power in our world." His voice softened slightly. "I could help you." "In exchange for what?" Rebecca's tone was icy. "Nothing inappropriate, I assure you. Merely your company. Dinner, perhaps. Conversation. A chance to know the woman behind the mystery. And if that doesn't satisfy you, what then?" The Duke's expression grew serious. "Contrary to what you may have heard, I'm not in the habit of forcing my attentions where they're not welcomed. I'm proposing a business arrangement, nothing more. Unless, of course, you desire something more." Rebecca nearly laughed at his audacity. "You are remarkably sure of your appeal, Your Grace." "Not at all. I'm merely offering options." He glanced around the room, noting the curious eyes upon them. "You need a solution, and quickly. I can provide it, with no strings attached beyond the pleasure of your company." The offer was tempting, dangerously so. But Rebecca had learned the hard way that men's promises often came with hidden costs. "I appreciate your generous offer, but I must decline." For the first time, genuine surprise crossed the Duke's features. "For you would rather lose Briarwood than accept my help. That seems an excessive price for pride." "It isn't pride, Your Grace, it's experience." Rebecca rose to her feet. "I've learned the danger of becoming indebted to men who collect beautiful things. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should bid Elizabeth farewell." As she walked away, the Duke remained seated, his expression unreadable. What Rebecca couldn't know was that her refusal had accomplished what her beauty alone could not. It had ignited not just his interest, but his respect. And James Charlemont, Duke of Harrington, had never respected a woman before. Later that evening, as Rebecca sat alone in her study reviewing the financial books she had purchased, Sophie entered with a small package. "This was just delivered for you, my lady. The messenger said it was urgent." Rebecca opened the package to find a slim volume bound in green leather. The title read, Modern Investment Strategies for the Discerning Gentleman. Inside the cover was a handwritten note. Countess Stuart, since you prefer to make your own way, perhaps this might prove useful. Chapter 7. On Railway Investments is particularly illuminating. With respect for your independence, Harrington. Rebecca's first impulse was to close the book and return it immediately. But curiosity got the better of her, and she turned to Chapter 7. There, tucked between the pages, was a newspaper clipping about a new railway line being planned between London and Bristol, with shares being offered to initial investors. She studied the article carefully. The projected returns were substantial, and the timeline aligned with her needs. Most importantly, the minimum investment was within her modest means. It could be the solution she sought, a way to save Briarwood without becoming indebted to the Duke. Yet the fact that he had provided this information presented its own complication. Why would he help her after she had so firmly rejected his offer? What did he truly want from her? As the night deepened outside her window, Rebecca contemplated the Duke's motives and her own precarious situation. Whatever game he was playing, she would have to proceed with extreme caution. Too much depended on her maintaining not just her independence, but her secrets. For what no one in London knew, what no one could ever know, was that Rebecca Stuart had left England 3 years ago not merely to escape gossip or to mourn a husband, but to hide a truth that could destroy everything she had left. The following weeks brought a subtle shift in the dynamic between Rebecca and the Duke of Harrington. Rather than pursuing her directly, he seemed content to observe from a distance, appearing at the same social functions, but approaching her only for brief, cordial exchanges. This change in tactics unsettled Rebecca more than his earlier persistence had. He's planning something, she confided to Elizabeth as they browsed fabrics at a fashionable draper's shop on Bond Street. This sudden restraint doesn't suit his character. Elizabeth examined a bolt of pale blue silk. Perhaps he's simply respecting your wishes. Even James must occasionally behave like a gentleman. Men like the Duke don't retreat. They merely change strategies. Rebecca ran her fingers over a deep green velvet. Besides, I received word that he's been making inquiries about my time in Italy. Elizabeth's hand paused mid-motion. What sort of inquiries? Nothing specific according to my contacts, just questions about where I lived, who I associated with. Are you concerned about what he might discover? Rebecca met her friend's concerned gaze. You know why I must be cautious, Elizabeth. Yes, but surely after 3 years, time doesn't erase certain complications. Rebecca lowered her voice further. If the truth about those years became public knowledge, I would be ruined, and not just socially. Elizabeth squeezed her hand reassuringly. Then we must ensure the Duke's curiosity is directed elsewhere. Perhaps if he believed you had another suitor. I have no interest in encouraging any suitors, real or imagined. It needn't be genuine, just a strategic diversion. Rebecca shook her head. No more games, Elizabeth. I've had my fill of deception. The irony of this statement wasn't lost on either of them. Rebecca's entire return to London was built upon careful omissions and half-truths. Their conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice behind them. Ladies, what a delightful surprise. The Duke of Harrington stood at the entrance to the shop, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Beside him was Lord Edward Blackwood, who offered a polite bow. Your Grace, Lord Blackwood. Elizabeth curtsied slightly, her smile diplomatic. How unexpected to encounter you in a draper's shop. Edward required some fabric samples for his sister's birthday gift, James explained smoothly. I merely offered my company and aesthetic judgment. Lord Blackwood rolled his eyes good-naturedly. His aesthetic judgment consists of declaring everything either acceptable or insufficient, with no further elaboration. Rebecca couldn't help but smile at this frank assessment, which seemed to please the Duke immensely. Countess Stuart, he addressed her directly, I trust you found the material I sent you informative. Indeed, Your Grace, though I confess to some confusion about your motives in providing it. His expression revealed nothing. Must I have ulterior motives to offer assistance to a lady in need? Based on your reputation, yes. Instead of taking offense, he laughed, a genuine sound that momentarily transformed his face, revealing a glimpse of a less guarded man. Fair assessment, but perhaps my reputation, like many in London, has been somewhat exaggerated. Or perhaps, she countered, You're simply more subtle in your methods than others. The shopkeeper approached, eager to serve such distinguished customers, and the conversation shifted to more neutral topics. As they prepared to leave, the Duke addressed Rebecca again. I understand you've been investigating railway investments. She stiffened slightly. Your network of informants is impressively thorough. Not informants. I happen to sit on the board of the London and Bristol Railway Company. His voice held no smugness, merely statement of fact. Their offices noted your inquiry about share purchases. I see. Rebecca maintained her composure despite her discomfort at how easily he accessed information about her activities. If you're serious about investing, I could arrange a private meeting with the chief engineer. He could provide insights not available in the public prospectus. Rebecca studied his face, searching for signs of manipulation or hidden agenda. She found none, only what appeared to be genuine offer of assistance. Why would you help me when I've consistently rebuffed your advances? She asked directly. Something shifted in his expression, a brief vulnerability quickly masked. Perhaps I'm attempting to demonstrate that not all men have ulterior motives. A noble sentiment, but somewhat contradicted by your reputation. Reputations, as I said, can be misleading. He glanced at Elizabeth and Lord Blackwood, who had discreetly moved away to give them privacy. The meeting would be entirely professional. You're free to bring Lady Elizabeth as a companion, if that would make you more comfortable. Rebecca considered the offer. The railway investment represented her best hope of saving Briarwood, and insider information could prove invaluable. Yet accepting his help meant forming a connection she had been determined to avoid. I'll consider it, she finally said. You may send the details to my residence on Chester Street. His smile held genuine pleasure. Excellent. I shall arrange it for tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. After the gentleman departed, Elizabeth hurried back to Rebecca's side. What did he say to put that expression on your face? He's offered to arrange a meeting with the chief engineer of the railway company. And you accepted? Elizabeth's surprise was evident. I said I would consider it. Rebecca gathered her purchases, her mind racing. Which I am. Logically, it's an opportunity I would be foolish to refuse. But you're concerned about his motivations. Constantly, Rebecca sighed. Yet I cannot deny that his assistance thus far has been genuinely helpful, with no apparent expectations. Most unusual for James, Elizabeth mused as they exited the shop. In all the years I've known him, I've never seen him pursue a woman with such restraint. Perhaps that's precisely what concerns me, Rebecca admitted. This deviation from his established pattern suggests something different in his intentions, and different is unpredictable. The following afternoon found Rebecca and Elizabeth in the modest but respectable offices of the London and Bristol Railway Company. The chief engineer, Mr. Harrison, a practical man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers, had laid out detailed maps and financial projections for their review. The Duke mentioned you were interested in becoming an investor, Countess Stewart, he said, pointing to a section of the route map. We've secured most of the necessary land rights, and construction begins next month on the first section. Initial investors stand to realize a 15% return within the first year, potentially doubling their investment by completion. Rebecca studied the documents carefully. And what are the primary risks? Mr. Harrison looked impressed by the question. Weather delays, primarily. Also, negotiations are still ongoing for some land parcels near Bristol, but we've built contingencies into both the timeline and budget. For the next hour, Rebecca asked detailed questions about every aspect of the project, questions that clearly surprised the engineer with their technical precision and business acumen. Elizabeth watched with quiet pride as her friend demonstrated knowledge that would have been considered inappropriate for a woman of their social standing just a few years earlier. As they concluded their meeting, the door opened and the Duke of Harrington entered. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said, though his timing suggested the opposite. I merely wanted to ensure that Mr. Harrison had provided all the necessary information. The Countess has a remarkably thorough understanding of railway finance for a lady, Mr. Harrison commented, gathering his papers. Your Grace didn't mention she was so well versed in business matters. The Countess continually surprises, James replied, his eyes on Rebecca. That's what makes her exceptional. After the engineer excused himself, the Duke turned to the ladies. I trust the meeting was informative. Extremely, Rebecca acknowledged. Thank you for arranging it. Have you decided whether to invest? I believe I shall. The potential returns align with my requirements and the risks seem manageable. Excellent. He hesitated, then continued. I wondered if you ladies might join me for tea. My carriage is waiting, and there's a matter I'd like to discuss with you, Countess. Elizabeth glanced at Rebecca, who gave a slight nod. That would be acceptable, Your Grace. Instead of a public tea room, the Duke's carriage brought them to Harrington House, his imposing mansion on Grosvenor Square. The ladies were shown to an elegant sitting room overlooking manicured gardens, where a tea service awaited them. I hope you don't mind the privacy, James said as a footman poured the tea. What I wish to discuss is somewhat delicate. Rebecca's guard immediately rose. I cannot imagine what delicate matters we might need to discuss, Your Grace. He waited until the footman had exited before responding. It concerns Lord Richard Stuart. The mention of William's cousin caused Rebecca to set down her teacup. What about him? He's been making inquiries about your financial situation. Rather pointed ones. Elizabeth frowned. How do you know this? Lord Richard approached one of my business associates seeking capital for his mining venture. He was quite specific about his plans for Briarwood once he acquires it, which he seems confident will happen within 3 months. Rebecca's stomach tightened. His confidence is premature. Perhaps. But he mentioned something curious. The Duke's eyes held Rebecca's. He suggested there might be irregularities in your husband's will that could expedite his claim. That's absurd, Rebecca said, though her voice lacked conviction. William's will was properly executed and witnessed. So I would assume. However, Lord Richard implied that certain facts about your departure from England might invalidate your inheritance rights. The blood drained from Rebecca's face. Elizabeth immediately reached for her friend's hand. What exactly did he say? Elizabeth demanded. The Duke's expression softened. Nothing specific, but his insinuations were troubling enough that I felt you should be warned, Countess. Rebecca composed herself with visible effort. Thank you for bringing this to my attention. I shall inform my solicitor immediately. If I may, James leaned forward slightly, whatever Richard believes he knows, or thinks he knows, I could help you counter it. My influence in certain circles could ensure that any rumors he attempts to spread are discredited. The offer hung in the air between them. Rebecca felt trapped between the threat Lord Richard posed and the unknown consequences of accepting the Duke's help. Why? She finally asked. Why involve yourself in my troubles? What do you gain? For a moment, James seemed genuinely at a loss for words, an unusual state for a man known for his verbal facility. I'm not entirely certain, he admitted with surprising candor. Initially, I confess it was curiosity, then challenge, but now... He paused. Now I find myself concerned for your welfare in a way that exceeds mere interest or amusement. The honesty in his voice was disarming. Rebecca exchanged a glance with Elizabeth, who gave an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. I appreciate your concern, Your Grace, but I've learned through bitter experience that accepting help often comes with unexpected costs. Not in this case, he countered. Consider it reparation for the many times I've behaved less than honorably toward women in the past. A ghost of a smile touched Rebecca's lips. Seeking redemption, Your Grace? Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply wish to prove myself capable of disinterested kindness. His smile matched hers. Though I will admit, your company is far from a hardship. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, the tension giving way to something more complex, a tentative connection neither had anticipated. Elizabeth, sensing the change, rose to her feet. If you'll both excuse me, I need to speak with the Duke's housekeeper about a matter concerning my aunt's former lady's maid. I believe she's now in your employ, Your Grace. James looked momentarily confused, then understanding dawned. Ah, yes, Mrs. Jenkins. By all means, Lady Elizabeth. Harrison will direct you. After Elizabeth departed, Rebecca and James sat in silence for a moment. Your friend is remarkably transparent in her matchmaking efforts, James observed dryly. Rebecca couldn't help but laugh. Elizabeth has always lacked subtlety in certain matters. I apologize for her maneuvering. No apology necessary. I find myself grateful for the opportunity to speak with you privately. The warmth in his voice caused Rebecca to study him more carefully. The Duke of Harrington she had heard about, The calculating seducer, the merciless businessman, seemed at odds with the man sitting before her now. His expression held none of the practiced charm he had displayed at the Ashford ball. Instead, there was something almost vulnerable in his gaze. "You puzzle me, Your Grace," she admitted. "Your reputation suggests a man who views women as conquests, yet your actions toward me have been considerate. Perhaps because you're the first woman who has ever looked at me and seen past the title, the wealth, and the rumors." He leaned back in his chair. "Do you know what it's like to be viewed not as a person, but as a position in society?" The question resonated with Rebecca in ways he couldn't know. "More than you might imagine. When we met at the Ashford ball, you didn't see the Duke of Harrington. You saw a man you found presumptuous and arrogant, which, admittedly, I was." His smile held self-deprecation. "You judged me on my behavior, not my status. It was refreshing. I doubt being found wanting was truly refreshing. Honesty always is, however uncomfortable." He set down his teacup. "May I ask you something personal, Countess?" Rebecca tensed slightly. "You may ask. I reserve the right not to answer." "Fair enough." He studied her face. "Why did you really go to Italy after your husband's death? The conventional period of mourning could have been observed in England." Of all the questions he might have asked, this one struck closest to her hidden truth. Rebecca considered her response carefully. "Grief expresses itself differently in each person, Your Grace. I found I could not breathe in England after William died. Too many memories, too many expectations. Italy offered anonymity and peace. It wasn't a lie, merely an incomplete truth, something Rebecca had become adept at providing." "And did you find peace there?" "For a time." She looked past him to the garden beyond the window. "But one cannot hide from life forever." "Is that what you were doing? Hiding?" The direct question caught her off guard. Before she could formulate a response, he continued, "Forgive me. That was presumptuous." He rose and moved to the window. "We all have reasons for the choices we make, reasons we don't always wish to share with others." Something in his tone suggested personal experience with secrets. Rebecca found herself curious about this man, who seemed so different in private than his public persona suggested. "What about you, Your Grace? Does your reputation accurately reflect the man you are?" He turned back to face her, sunlight from the window casting half his face in shadow. "Parts of it, perhaps. I've certainly behaved callously toward women in the past. I've been ruthless in business. I've cultivated an image of detachment that serves me well in society." He paused. "But no, the reputation doesn't tell the whole story. Few reputations do." "And what parts does it miss?" His smile was tinged with irony. "That's a question I rarely consider. Perhaps that I read poetry, that I funded 3 orphanages anonymously, that I find most social functions tedious beyond endurance." "Why maintain the facade, then?" "The same reason anyone does, I imagine, protection." He moved back to his seat. "The world is kinder to those who meet its expectations, even if those expectations are unflattering." Rebecca found herself nodding in understanding. "It's easier to be the person others believe you to be than to convince them you are someone else entirely." "Precisely." His eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. "Though occasionally one meets someone who makes them wish to be seen for who they truly are." The implication hung in the air between them. Rebecca felt a curious fluttering in her chest, something she had not experienced since before William's betrayals had hardened her heart. "I should find Elizabeth," she said, rising abruptly. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough." James stood as well. "Before you go, I want to make something clear about Richard Stewart. Whatever he believes he knows or can prove, I can help you counter it. No expectations, no conditions." "Why would you do that?" "Because I believe you deserve better than to be at the mercy of a man like Richard." His voice was earnest. "And because, despite what society may think of me, I am capable of simple human decency." Rebecca wanted to believe him. After years of guarding her heart and her secrets, the prospect of an ally, someone who might protect rather than threaten her precarious position, was tempting beyond measure. "Thank you," she said finally. "If Lord Richard makes any moves against me, I will consider your offer." It was a small concession, but the relief in James's eyes suggested it meant more to him than she had intended. As Rebecca and Elizabeth departed Harrington House, the Duke handed Rebecca into the carriage himself. Their gloved hands touched briefly, and for a moment something unspoken passed between them. a recognition of change, a possibility neither had anticipated. "Until next time, Countess Stuart," he said softly. "Until next time, Your Grace," she replied, surprised to find herself looking forward to that prospect. The carriage pulled away, leaving James standing on the steps of his mansion, watching until it disappeared from view. Inside, Rebecca sat in contemplative silence, while Elizabeth observed her with knowing eyes. "He's falling in love with you," Elizabeth stated simply. Rebecca shook her head. "Don't be absurd. The Duke doesn't fall in love. He conquers, he possesses, he discards. And yet I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Elizabeth's voice softened. "More importantly, I've never seen you respond to anyone the way you respond to him." "I don't respond to him," Rebecca protested, though her conviction wavered. "You do. You come alive in his presence, arguing, challenging, engaging. It's the first time since William that I've seen the real Rebecca emerge from behind that carefully constructed facade of yours." Rebecca turned to gaze out the window at the passing streets of London. "Even if what you suggest were true, which it isn't, you know why any attachment would be impossible." Elizabeth reached across to take her hand. "Perhaps it's time to consider that the past need not define your future forever. 3 years is a long time, Rebecca. Circumstances change. People change." "Some things cannot change," Rebecca replied softly. "Some secrets cannot be shared. Not even with someone who might understand, who might help. Especially not with someone like the Duke." Rebecca's voice hardened. "His world is one of privilege and power. He cannot possibly comprehend the choices I've had to make." Elizabeth sighed. "You may be underestimating him, and yourself." The carriage continued through London's busy streets, carrying Rebecca toward a future increasingly complicated by feelings she had believed herself incapable of experiencing again. Despite her protestations, the Duke of Harrington had awakened something in her, something both frightening and exhilarating in its intensity. Meanwhile, across town in a considerably less elegant establishment, Lord Richard Stuart sat with a man whose shabby gentility suggested reduced circumstances. They spoke in low voices, heads bent close over a table in the corner. "You're certain of this information?" Richard asked, sliding a small pouch of coins across the table. The man pocketed the payment with practiced swiftness. "Absolutely, my lord. My cousin was employed at the villa in Florence. She saw everything." "And you have proof, documents?" "Better. A witness willing to testify for the right price." Richard's thin lips curved into a smile. "Excellent. The Countess's time is running out faster than she knows." As night fell over London, 3 people lay awake contemplating the future. Rebecca, haunted by secrets that threatened everything she had rebuilt. James, experiencing unfamiliar emotions that challenged his cynical worldview. And Richard, plotting the destruction of a woman whose only crime had been seeking peace in a world that offered her none. The railway investment proceeded smoothly. Rebecca committed a significant portion of her modest capital to the venture, bolstered by the chief engineer's assurances and, though she was reluctant to admit it, the Duke's involvement with the company. Over the following weeks, preliminary reports indicated that construction was advancing ahead of schedule, increasing the likelihood of substantial returns. During this time, Rebecca found herself encountering the Duke with increasing frequency, sometimes by apparent coincidence, sometimes by mutual friends' arrangements. Each meeting deepened the connection between them, a connection that increasingly troubled and intrigued her in equal measure. "You're developing feelings for him," Elizabeth observed one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park. "Don't bother denying it. I've known you too long to be deceived by that serene expression." Rebecca adjusted her parasol against the spring sunshine. "I find him less objectionable than I initially believed. That's hardly a declaration of affection." Elizabeth laughed. "For you, that practically is a declaration. You've built such walls around your heart these past years that even acknowledging someone as less objectionable is remarkable progress. The walls exist for good reason. They did once. I'm not certain they still do." Elizabeth glanced sideways at her friend. "He asked about you again yesterday when he called on Frederick." Rebecca tried to appear indifferent. "What did he want to know?" "Whether you enjoy the theatre. Apparently he has access to a private box for the new production at the Royal Opera House tomorrow evening." "And what did you tell him?" "The truth, that you adored the theatre before your marriage. but haven't attended since your return from Italy." Elizabeth paused. "I also mentioned that you particularly enjoyed Mozart." Rebecca sighed. "You're incorrigible. I prefer helpful." Elizabeth's expression turned serious. "He'll invite you, Rebecca, and I think you should accept." "Why? So London society can speculate about another conquest for the notorious Duke?" "No, because I haven't seen you truly smile in 3 years except when you speak of him." Elizabeth took her arm. "You deserve happiness, my dear friend. Despite what you may believe, you are not condemned to solitude forever because of the past." Rebecca wanted to protest, but found she lacked the conviction. The truth was, her feelings for James had evolved beyond her control or expectations. Despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance, she found herself anticipating their meetings, replaying their conversations, wondering about the man behind the ducal facade. That evening, a messenger delivered a small package to her home. Inside was a leather-bound copy of Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, with a note in now familiar handwriting. "The Royal Opera House, tomorrow at 7. I'll send my carriage if you wish to attend. No expectations beyond the pleasure of your company and the beauty of Mozart. Yours, James." The use of his given name rather than his title struck Rebecca as significant, an invitation to greater intimacy that both alarmed and thrilled her. Sophie found her staring at the note long after she should have retired for the evening. "A pleasant message, my lady," the maid inquired, preparing Rebecca's nightclothes. "An invitation to the opera," Rebecca replied absently. "From the Duke of Harrington." Sophie paused. "Will you accept?" "I shouldn't. That doesn't answer my question." Sophie's tone held the familiarity born of their years together in Italy, where conventional mistress-servant boundaries had blurred. Rebecca looked up at her faithful companion. "What would you do, Sophie?" "I think, my lady, after everything you've endured, you deserve an evening of beauty and pleasure without guilt or fear." Sophie began brushing out Rebecca's dark hair. "The Duke seems genuinely taken with you. Is it so impossible that his interest might be honourable?" "Based on his history, yes." Yet even as she said it, Rebecca knew she was being unfair. The James she had come to know over recent weeks was far more complex than his reputation suggested. "People change, my lady." Sophie's voice was gentle. "Sometimes due to circumstances, sometimes due to meeting someone who makes them want to be better than they are." The following evening, after hours of indecision, Rebecca found herself stepping into the Duke's carriage. She had chosen a gown of deep blue silk that complemented her dark hair and pale complexion, elegant but not ostentatious. The Duke was waiting at the entrance to the opera house, his tall figure distinguished in formal evening attire. His expression when he saw her approaching contained none of the practiced appreciation he might offer any beautiful woman, but rather a genuine pleasure that transformed his features. "You came," he said simply, offering his arm. "Mozart is difficult to resist," she replied with a small smile. "And am I also difficult to resist?" The question was posed lightly, but his eyes were serious. "Increasingly so, much to my consternation." He laughed, delighted by her honesty. "I find your consternation far more flattering than false enthusiasm." As he escorted her to his private box, Rebecca was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed them. The Duke of Harrington with the mysterious Countess Stuart would provide gossip for weeks. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them. I've endured their speculation for years. It becomes background noise eventually." The private box offered both excellent views of the stage and welcome seclusion from prying eyes. As the orchestra began the overture, Rebecca found herself relaxing for the first time in days. Music had always been her refuge, the one pleasure that transported her beyond her troubles. James watched her more than the performance, captivated by the genuine emotion that played across her features. This was Rebecca unguarded, responding to the beauty of Mozart's creation with an openness she rarely displayed in society. During the intermission, he procured refreshments, and they remained in the box, avoiding the social mingling in the lobby. "You're different when you listen to music," he observed, "more in present." Rebecca smiled. "Music speaks truth in a way words seldom manage. There's no deception in a perfect aria, no hidden motives in a beautiful melody." Unlike most people," she amended, "though I'm beginning to believe there may be exceptions." He met her gaze directly. I would like to be an exception in your eyes." The honesty of the statement caught her off guard. Before she could respond, the orchestra began tuning for the second act, saving her from having to articulate feelings she wasn't ready to acknowledge. As the performance concluded and applause filled the opera house, James turned to her. "Would you consider taking a short walk before returning home? The night is unusually mild for spring." The request was innocent enough, yet Rebecca hesitated, knowing that prolonging their evening meant lowering her defenses further. "Just to the gardens behind the opera house," he clarified, sensing her reluctance. Well within the bounds of propriety. "Very well," she agreed. A short walk. The gardens were illuminated by strategically placed lanterns, creating pools of golden light among the shadows. A few other patrons strolled the pathways, providing the minimum chaperonage required by society's standards while allowing private conversation. "Thank you for joining me tonight," James said as they walked. "I've attended countless performances in that box, but never truly enjoyed one until seeing it through your eyes. You're a flatterer, Your Grace." "James," he corrected gently. "And it's not flattery if it's true." They paused beside a small fountain whose waters caught the moonlight in silver ripples. "May I ask you something personal?" he ventured. Rebecca tensed slightly but nodded. "Were you happy in your marriage? Before—" he hesitated. "Before whatever happened that sent you to Italy?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Most people in their circle would never address such a topic so plainly. "Initially," she answered after a moment, "William was charming, attentive. He made me feel cherished. But it changed." "How?" Rebecca considered how much to reveal. "He had gambling debts I didn't know about when we married. As they mounted, he became desperate, then reckless. He began drinking heavily, staying away for days at a time." She paused. "There were other women, many of them. He made no particular effort to be discreet." James's expression darkened. "He was a fool." "He was troubled," Rebecca corrected, "and I was naive. I believed love could overcome any difficulty. And now I believe that love, while powerful, is not always sufficient. It requires honesty, respect, and trust to survive." She looked up at him. "Qualities I suspect you understand the importance of, despite your reputation suggesting otherwise." He was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My reputation as a seducer is not entirely undeserved," he finally said. "I've treated women as conquests, as temporary amusements. I've been careless with feelings and callous in my dismissals. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know who I was, so you can appreciate who I'm trying to become." His voice lowered. "Because when I'm with you, I find myself wanting to be worthy of the way you look at me when you forget to be guarded." The confession, so unexpected and sincere, stirred emotions Rebecca had long suppressed. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to trust again, to open her heart to this complex man who seemed as surprised by his feelings as she was by hers. "James," she began, but was interrupted by a voice calling her name. "Countess Stuart, what a delightful surprise." Lord Richard Stuart approached from the main path, his thin smile failing to reach his cold eyes. Rebecca instinctively stepped back, creating distance between herself and James. "Lord Richard," she acknowledged stiffly, "I didn't realize you were a patron of the opera." "Occasionally, though I find I'm drawn more to the dramatic performances outside the theatre." His gaze shifted meaningfully between her and the Duke. "Your Grace, I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Richard Stuart, cousin to the late Earl of Westmoreland." James's expression revealed nothing as he inclined his head slightly. "Lord Richard, the Countess has mentioned you." "All good things, I hope." Richard's smile widened. "Though I imagine our dear Rebecca has many stories she prefers not to share, particularly about her time in Italy." The implied threat was unmistakable. Rebecca felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "The weather has turned chilly," she said, pulling her shawl closer around her shoulders. "I believe it's time I returned home." "Of course," James responded immediately, offering his arm. "Lord Richard, if you'll excuse us." Richard bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "By all means. Though, Countess, we really must arrange a time to discuss family matters. I've recently acquired some information about Briarwood that might interest you." "My solicitor handles all matters related to the estate," Rebecca replied coldly. "This is rather more personal than legal." Richard's eyes gleamed with malice. "Family secrets, you might say." James felt Rebecca's hand tighten on his arm. "Good evening, Lord Richard," he said with finality, steering Rebecca toward the main entrance where his carriage waited. Once they were safely inside the vehicle, Rebecca released a shaky breath. "I apologize for that unpleasant encounter." "No apology necessary." James studied her pale face with concern. "He was deliberately trying to intimidate you. May I ask why?" Rebecca turned to look out the window, unwilling to meet his eyes. "As I mentioned before, he wants Briarwood. He believes he has a stronger claim to it than I do." "Based on what?" "Legal technicalities, I assume." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. James was silent for a moment. "Rebecca," he said finally, using her given name for the first time aloud, "I cannot help you if you won't trust me with the truth." She turned back to face him, her expression pained. "Some truths are too dangerous to share, even with those we care for." The admission of care hung between them, significant despite the circumstances. "There is nothing you could tell me that would change how I feel about you," he said quietly, "and nothing that would make me betray your confidence." For a brief, terrifying moment, Rebecca considered telling him everything. About William's final days, about her flight to Italy, about the secret she had guarded for 3 long years. The impulse was so strong she had to press her lips together to keep the words from spilling out. "I can't," she whispered. "Please understand." James took her hand gently. "Then know this. Whatever Richard thinks he knows or can prove, he will have to go through me to use it against you. I may not know your secret, but I will protect it as if it were my own." The promise, delivered with such conviction, brought unexpected tears to Rebecca's eyes. She had been alone with her burden for so long that the prospect of having an ally, even one who didn't know what he was defending, was overwhelming. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely audible. They rode in silence for the remainder of the journey, hands still joined, each lost in thoughts of what had been said and what remained unspoken. When the carriage stopped at her townhouse, James escorted her to the door. "Despite Lord Richard's interruption, I hope you enjoyed the evening," he said. "I did." Rebecca found herself reluctant to part from him. The opera was magnificent, as was the company. His eyes held hers for a long moment. "May I call on you tomorrow? Perhaps a drive in the park if the weather permits." The proper response would be to decline, to retreat behind the walls she had built so carefully. But something in her rebelled against caution, against the loneliness that had been her companion for too long. "Yes," she said simply, "I would like that." His smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Until tomorrow, then." He raised her gloved hand to his lips briefly, then returned to his carriage. Rebecca watched until it disappeared around the corner, her mind and heart in turmoil. Inside, Sophie was waiting to help her undress. "How was the opera, my lady?" "Beautiful," Rebecca replied absently, her thoughts elsewhere. "And the Duke?" Rebecca met her maid's knowing gaze in the mirror. "Unexpected, Sophie, in every possible way." As she prepared for bed, Rebecca knew she had reached a crossroads. Her feelings for James had grown beyond her ability to deny or control them. Yet her secret stood between them like an invisible wall, a wall that would crumble to dust if Richard Stuart had his way. The question that haunted her as she drifted into uneasy sleep was whether James's professed feelings would survive the revelation of her past. For the first time in years, Rebecca found herself hoping, against all experience and reason, that love might indeed be stronger than deception, stronger even than the truth she had fled to Italy to hide. The following days brought a subtle shift in Rebecca's relationship with James. Their drive in the park led to tea at Lady Elizabeth's home, which led to attendance at a small musical evening, which led to a private tour of his extensive library at Harrington House. Each encounter deepened their connection, drawing them into a closeness that both exhilarated and frightened Rebecca. London society observed this developing attachment with avid interest. The notorious Duke of Harrington, pursuing a mysterious widow with apparent seriousness, provided fodder for endless speculation. "They say he's completely transformed," Lady Pembroke informed her circle of gossips over tea. "No other women, no gambling, scarcely any time at his club. It's most unnatural." Perhaps he's finally met his match, suggested Mrs. Hawthorne, though what he sees in her is beyond my comprehension. A widow with questionable connections and a failing estate hardly seems suitable for a duke. There must be something extraordinary about her we don't perceive, mused another lady. Or perhaps it's merely a more elaborate game than his usual pursuits. These rumors inevitably reached Rebecca, who tried to dismiss them, but found herself increasingly troubled by the public nature of their relationship. When James called upon her one afternoon in early May, she expressed her concerns. "People are talking, James." She paced the small drawing room of her townhouse. "Your reputation makes their assumptions particularly unsavory." He watched her from his seat by the window. "Does it matter what they think?" "Of course it matters. My position in society is already precarious. I cannot afford scandal." "Then give them something else to talk about," he suggested, his expression thoughtful. "Something that would silence the worst of the speculation." Rebecca paused in her pacing. "What do you mean?" James rose and crossed to stand before her. "Let me court you properly, Rebecca, openly, with honorable intentions." Her heart seemed to stop momentarily. "You cannot be serious." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." His voice was steady, his gaze unwavering. "These past weeks have shown me what I never believed possible, that there exists a woman who sees me as I truly am and challenges me to be better than I have been." "James, you don't know me. Not truly. There are things in my past that would make you reconsider such feelings. Do you imagine my past is unblemished?" He took her hands in his. "I've told you about the man I was before I met you. I've made no secret of my failings, yet you've seen beyond them to who I am trying to become." Rebecca gently withdrew her hands. "My secrets are not mere failings, James. They are complications that would affect any future we might contemplate. Then share them with me. Let me decide for myself what I can accept." The plea was earnest, his expression open and vulnerable, in a way few people had ever seen. For a moment, Rebecca wavered. "I cannot," she said finally. "Not yet. Perhaps not ever." Instead of anger or frustration, his face showed only compassion. "Then I will continue to earn your trust until you can. But my feelings will not change, Rebecca, and my offer of courtship stands." Before she could respond, Sophie entered with a message. "Forgive the interruption, my lady, but this just arrived from Mr. Ainsworth. He said it was urgent." Rebecca took the sealed letter with a sense of foreboding. Breaking the seal, she scanned the contents, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "What is it?" James asked, concerned by the sudden pallor of her complexion. "Lord Richard has filed a formal challenge to my inheritance rights," she said, her voice barely audible. "He claims to have evidence that I abandoned my duties as William's wife prior to his death, which would invalidate my claim to Briarwood under the terms of the entailment." James moved to her side. "May I?" He gestured to the letter. After a moment's hesitation, she handed it to him. As he read, his brow furrowed. "This is nonsense," he declared. "Legal maneuvering designed to intimidate you. His so-called evidence is likely non-existent." Rebecca sank into a nearby chair. "You don't understand. He may indeed have evidence." A heavy silence fell between them. James carefully refolded the letter and placed it on the side table before kneeling beside her chair. "Rebecca," he said gently, "whatever it is you're afraid of, facing it with an ally is better than facing it alone." She looked at him, this man who had somehow breached her defenses and awakened feelings she had thought forever dormant. In his eyes, she saw not judgment, but unwavering support. "Very well," she whispered, "but not here. There are too many ears in London." "Where then?" "Briarwood." The decision formed as she spoke it. "It's fitting that you should hear the truth there, where it all began." James nodded, understanding the significance of her choice. "When?" "Tomorrow, before my courage fails me." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Though I warn you, what you learn may change everything between us." "Nothing could change how I feel about you," he insisted. Rebecca's expression was sad. "Don't make promises you cannot keep." The following day dawned clear and mild. James had arranged for his private carriage to convey them to Berkshire, with Elizabeth accompanying them as propriety demanded. The 3-hour journey passed in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Briarwood Estate, Rebecca gazed out the window at the familiar landscape with mixed emotions. The rolling hills and ancient oak trees had once represented home and hope. Now they stood as silent witnesses to the collapse of those dreams. The house itself, a substantial Georgian manor of weathered stone, looked shabbier than she remembered. 3 years of minimal maintenance had taken their toll on the once pristine estate. "It's lovely," Elizabeth remarked as the carriage wound up the long drive. "A bit neglected, perhaps, but the bones are beautiful." "It was magnificent when I first came here as a bride," Rebecca said softly. "William took great pride in the grounds, if not in the financial management of the estate. James observed the property with a critical eye. With proper investment, it could be restored relatively quickly. The structural elements appear sound." As the carriage stopped before the main entrance, an elderly man in the formal attire of a butler emerged from the house. "Mr. Simmons," Rebecca greeted him warmly as she alighted from the carriage. "How good to see you again." The butler bowed deeply. "Welcome home, my lady. We've prepared the main rooms as you requested, though I fear you'll find them not up to their former standard." "I'm sure they'll be perfectly adequate," she assured him. "May I present His Grace, the Duke of Harrington, and Lady Elizabeth Harwick?" Simmons bowed again, his expression revealing nothing of what must have been considerable surprise at her distinguished guests. "Refreshments have been laid in the drawing-room, my lady. Mrs. Collins has prepared luncheon for 1 o'clock. The interior of Briarwood confirmed James's assessment, structurally sound but showing clear signs of financial constraints in its maintenance. Faded fabrics, worn carpets, and empty spaces where valuable items had once stood told the story of William Stuart's financial mismanagement. After a brief refreshment, Elizabeth tactfully suggested she might like to explore the gardens, giving Rebecca and James the privacy their conversation required. When they were alone in the drawing-room, Rebecca moved to the window overlooking the south lawn. "I came to Briarwood as a bride of 19, she began without preamble. "My father had recently died, leaving me with a modest inheritance but no home of my own. William seemed like everything I could have wished for, handsome, charming, from a respectable family." She paused. "I was so desperately in love with him." James remained silent, giving her space to tell her story in her own way. "The first year was wonderful, or so I believed. I later discovered that even then he was gambling away his inheritance and accumulating debts. By our second anniversary, creditors were calling regularly. William began to stay away for days, sometimes weeks. When he returned, he often brought friends, men whose company I found distasteful." She turned from the window to face James. "One night, after a particularly disastrous evening at the gaming tables, William came home in a rage. He'd lost an enormous sum to Lord Richard, money he didn't have. Richard came with him, demanding payment." Her voice faltered. "William offered him an alternative form of payment." James's expression darkened as understanding dawned. "He offered you?" Rebecca nodded, the memory still painful despite the passage of time. "Not directly, of course. He suggested Richard stay as our guest, placed him in the bedroom adjoining mine, and then announced he had urgent business in London. Before he left, he told me to be hospitable to his cousin. His meaning was unmistakable. What did you do?" "I locked my door and did not emerge until William returned 3 days later. Richard was furious, of course. He felt cheated of his compensation." Her voice was bitter now. "William beat me for my disobedience. It was the first time, but not the last." James's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight with anger on her behalf. "The blackguard," he muttered. "Had he lived, I would have called him out for such treatment." Rebecca gave a sad smile. "Dueling wouldn't have changed his nature. Nothing could." She moved to sit on a faded settee. "After that night, our marriage became a prison. William drank heavily and was often violent. He brought women into our home, sometimes serving maids, sometimes women from the village, occasionally ladies of his acquaintance who had no more morals than he did. Why didn't you leave him? Seek protection from family or friends?" "I had no family left. And divorce was unthinkable for a woman of my position. I would have been utterly ruined. Besides, William made it clear that if I attempted to leave, he would ensure I was declared mentally unstable and confined to an asylum." She met James's gaze directly. "So I endured, until one night when endurance became impossible. This was it, the moment of truth she had dreaded and postponed. Rebecca took a deep breath. William had lost heavily again. He returned home drunk and in a vicious temper. Sophie was bringing my evening tea when he burst into my room. She swallowed hard. He began to beat me with his riding crop. When Sophie tried to intervene, he struck her as well. Something in me broke, James. Years of fear and humiliation culminated in that moment. I grabbed a heavy silver candlestick from my dressing table and struck him. James's expression was grim, but not judgmental. Self-defense is no crime, Rebecca. It became one when he fell, striking his head on the marble fireplace hearth. Her voice was barely a whisper now. He died instantly. The silence that followed her confession seemed to stretch endlessly. Rebecca couldn't bear to look at James, certain she would see horror or disgust in his eyes. "What happened then?" he finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. Sophie and I panicked. We knew that even with the years of abuse, I would likely be charged with murder. William had been careful to limit his violence to times when there were no witnesses beyond the servants, who would not be considered reliable against a peer's word. And he had friends in influential positions who would ensure I received no mercy. She rose and began pacing, relieving the tension that had built within her. We made a desperate decision. William had been planning to go riding early the next morning. We dressed him, carried him to the stables and arranged for him to be found on the grounds, as though he had been thrown from his horse and suffered a fatal head injury. And no one questioned this. The local doctor had treated William for injuries from falls before. He was a notoriously reckless rider, especially when drunk, and the head injury was consistent with such an accident. She paused. But we were terrified that someone might discover the truth. So after the funeral, I claimed I couldn't bear to remain at Briarwood with its memories. We fled to Italy, where no one knew us or our circumstances. James was silent for a long moment, absorbing the full weight of her confession. Rebecca waited, her heart pounding for his judgment. "So this is the secret Richard believes he has uncovered," he finally said. "Yes. If he can prove that William died by my hand rather than by accident, I would lose all claim to Briarwood. More importantly, I could be tried for murder." She looked at him directly now. "Do you understand now why I said your feelings might change when you knew the truth? I am, by the strictest definition, a murderess." James rose and crossed to where she stood. "You are a woman who defended herself against brutal treatment after years of endurance. William's death was an accident born of his own cruelty. The law may not see it that way. Then the law is wrong," he stated firmly. "Rebecca, nothing you have told me diminishes my regard for you. If anything, knowing what you have survived only increases my admiration for your strength and dignity." She searched his face for any sign of revulsion or judgment, finding none. "You cannot mean that. The scandal alone would destroy your position in society. My position can withstand far worse than the revelation that the woman I love defended herself against a monster." The words escaped before he could consider them, but once spoken he did not retract them. "Yes, Rebecca, I love you. I believe I began falling in love with you the moment you refused to dance with me at the Ashford ball." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "James, you mustn't. I'm not free to love or be loved. This shadow will always hang over me. Only if we allow it to." He took her hands in his. "Richard Stewart is a bully and an opportunist. Whatever evidence he thinks he has, we can counter it. Together." "How?" Her voice broke on the word. "If he has found someone who knows the truth, a servant from Briarwood perhaps, or someone in Italy who observed us, then we will deal with that person directly." James's expression hardened with determination. "I have resources and connections that Richard cannot match. More importantly, I have the truth of who you are. A woman of extraordinary courage and principle who has endured more than anyone should have to bear." For the first time since William's death, Rebecca allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by fear and secrecy. The possibility of happiness, of love, with this man who stood before her, offering not judgment, but protection and understanding, seemed almost too precious to contemplate. "I don't deserve such loyalty," she whispered. "I deserve that and far more." His voice was gentle but firm. "Now will you allow me to help you face Richard and end his threats once and for all?" After a moment's hesitation, Rebecca nodded. "Yes." The simple word carried the weight of years of solitary struggle. In that moment, something shifted between them. a barrier falling, a bridge forming over the chasm of her fears. "There's something else I need to tell you," James said, his expression softening. "Something I had planned to say under different circumstances, but which seems even more important now." Rebecca looked at him questioningly. "I meant what I said about courting you properly, Rebecca, but I find I cannot wait for the traditional progression of such things." He took a deep breath. "I am asking you to marry me, not out of pity or protection, though I offer both if needed, but because I love you and cannot imagine a future without you by my side." The proposal, so unexpected after her devastating confession, left Rebecca momentarily speechless. "James, you cannot know what you're saying. The risk is mine to take," he interrupted gently, "and I take it gladly. There would always be those who might discover the truth. Let them try." His smile held a hint of the ruthlessness that had made him so formidable in business. "I protect what is mine, Rebecca, and I want you to be mine as I would be yours completely and without reservation." The depth of emotion in his eyes, this man who had once been known for his coldness, moved her beyond words. Rebecca felt something breaking open within her, like spring thaw after a long winter. The walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "yes, I will marry you." James's face transformed with joy. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were precious beyond measure. "You have made me the happiest of men," he murmured against her hair. When they finally separated, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in years, despite the threat still hanging over them. "What do we do about Richard?" she asked. "We confront him directly," James said, his expression determined. "But first, we ensure we have every advantage. Tell me everything you know about his supposed evidence." They spent the next hour strategizing, piecing together what Richard might have discovered and how they could counter it. When Elizabeth returned from her walk in the gardens, she found them seated together on the settee, hands intertwined, faces animated with purpose rather than fear. "Well," she said, observing their changed demeanor, "I see the truth has been shared and received with understanding. Thank heavens." Rebecca smiled at her friend. "James has asked me to marry him, Elizabeth, and I have accepted." Elizabeth's joyous response momentarily banished the shadow of Richard's threat. As the three friends shared luncheon in Briarwood's faded dining room, Rebecca allowed herself to hope that perhaps, after all her trials, happiness might finally be within her grasp. That hope was tested sooner than expected. As they prepared to return to London the following morning, a messenger arrived with an urgent communication. Richard Stewart had called a meeting of the Stewart family trustees for the following day, with the stated purpose of presenting evidence that would disqualify Rebecca from inheriting Briarwood. "He's moving quickly," James observed grimly as they read the message in the morning room. "He must be confident in whatever evidence he believes he has." "What do we do?" Rebecca asked, fighting to maintain her composure. "We proceed as planned." James's voice was calm, steadying. "I'll send word ahead to Lord Blackwood. He has connections in the Home Office that may prove useful, and I'll arrange for my solicitor to be present at this meeting." "I should be there as well," Rebecca insisted. "I won't hide while my future is decided by others." James studied her face, noting the determination that had replaced fear. "Very well, but you will not face Richard alone. I will be at your side throughout." The journey back to London was marked by a tension that even Elizabeth's attempts at light conversation could not dispel. Upon their arrival, James escorted Rebecca to her townhouse before departing to set their plans in motion. "Try to rest," he urged, kissing her hand in farewell. "Tomorrow will require all your strength. Will you come to me tonight?" "Before the meeting?" she asked, suddenly reluctant to let him go. "Of course. We will face this together, Rebecca. You are no longer alone." As James's carriage pulled away, Rebecca was struck by the profound truth of his words. After years of solitary struggle, she had found not just an ally, but a partner who saw her completely, her strengths and her flaws, her courage and her fear, and loved her not despite but because of who she truly was. That evening, as promised, James returned to her townhouse. He brought with him Lord Blackwood, whose quiet competence and evident loyalty to James were reassuring. The three of them, joined by Elizabeth, reviewed their strategy for the following day's confrontation. "Richard has requested that a representative from the magistrate's office be present," James informed them. "He clearly intends to make this a legal matter rather than merely a question of inheritance. Rebecca paled but maintained her composure. "He means to have me arrested." "He will not succeed," Lord Blackwood stated with quiet confidence. "I've made certain arrangements that should prevent such an outcome." The mysterious assurance in his tone prompted a questioning look from Rebecca. "Edward has certain connections that often prove invaluable in delicate situations," James explained. "It's better for all concerned if the details remain vague." The rest of the evening was spent in careful preparation. By the time James and Lord Blackwood departed, Rebecca felt as ready as she could be for whatever the next day might bring. Still, sleep eluded her as she lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling and contemplating how swiftly her life had changed, from lonely exile to the promise of love and partnership, all under the shadow of a threat that could still destroy everything. The next morning dawned grey and drizzling, fitting weather for the confrontation ahead. Rebecca dressed with particular care, choosing a gown of deep burgundy that conveyed both dignity and authority. Sophie helped arrange her dark hair in a simple but elegant style. "You look ready for battle, my lady," the maid observed. Rebecca met her eyes in the mirror. "In a sense, I am. But this time, I'm not fighting alone." James arrived precisely at the appointed hour, his formal attire and resolute expression matching her own battle-ready appearance. In the carriage on the way to the solicitor's office where the meeting would take place, he took her hand. "Whatever happens today," he said quietly, "remember that you are not defined by a single moment of desperate self-defense, but by every choice you've made since. Choices of dignity, resilience, and integrity." Rebecca squeezed his hand in silent gratitude for words that steadied her nerves and strengthened her resolve. The meeting room at Ainsworth and Son was already occupied when they arrived. Mr. Ainsworth rose to greet them, his expression concerned but professional. Lord Richard Stuart sat at one end of the long table, flanked by his own solicitor, and a stern-looking man whom Rebecca assumed was from the magistrate's office. To her surprise, Lord Blackwood was already present, engaged in quiet conversation with another gentleman in official-looking attire. "Ah, the happy couple," Richard drawled as they entered. "How touching! Though I fear your romance may be short-lived, Countess, once today's evidence is presented." "Lord Richard," James acknowledged coldly, "I trust you will conduct yourself with the decorum expected of a gentleman, despite all evidence suggesting that term may be misapplied in your case." Richard's smile faltered slightly at the thinly veiled insult. "Strong words from a man about to discover he has pledged himself to a murderess." "That is quite enough," Mr. Ainsworth interjected firmly. "This meeting will proceed with proper decorum or not at all." Once everyone was seated, the family trustee, a distinguished older gentleman named Sir Henry Blackwell, called the meeting to order. "We are gathered to address Lord Richard Stuart's claim that the Countess Rebecca Stuart is disqualified from inheriting Briarwood Estate under the terms of the entailment. Lord Richard, you may present your evidence." Richard rose, a look of triumphant malice on his thin face. "Thank you, Sir Henry. My evidence is both compelling and disturbing. I have here sworn testimony from a woman named Maria Rossi, who was employed as a housemaid at the villa in Florence, where the Countess resided after her hasty departure from England." He placed a document on the table. "Signorina Rossi testifies that she overheard a conversation between the Countess and her lady's maid, Sophie Martin, in which they explicitly discussed their role in the death of the Earl. According to this testimony, the Earl did not die in a riding accident but was killed by the Countess in their bedchamber, after which they staged his body to appear as though he had fallen from his horse." A murmur ran through the room. Rebecca sat perfectly still, her face a mask of composure despite the hammering of her heart. "Furthermore," Richard continued, "I have obtained correspondence between the Countess and her lady's maid during a brief separation, which contains veiled references to their shared burden and the importance of maintaining their agreed account of events. While not explicit, these letters take on a sinister meaning when viewed in light of Signorina Rossi's testimony." He produced several letters with a flourish. "In short, gentlemen, the Countess is guilty not merely of abandoning her duties as the Earl's wife, grounds enough to invalidate her inheritance, but of a far more serious crime, the murder of her husband." "A most dramatic accusation," James commented, his voice cool and steady. "Perhaps we might examine this supposed evidence more closely. The magistrate's representative, Mr. Thornton, reached for the documents. Indeed. May I? Richard handed over the testimony and letters with an air of confidence. Mr. Thornton read them carefully, his expression thoughtful. These are serious allegations, he said finally. However, I note several concerns. First, this testimony is not properly witnessed according to English law. Second, it comes from a single source who, by her own admission, overheard a conversation in a language not her native tongue. Third, these letters contain no explicit admission of wrongdoing, merely vague references that could be interpreted in numerous ways. Richard's smile faltered. The implications are clear enough when taken together. Implications are not evidence, my lord, Mr. Thornton replied firmly. Moreover, I understand from Lord Blackwood that Signorina Rossi has a rather questionable reputation in Florence. Is that correct, Lord Blackwood? Edward nodded. Indeed. My inquiries revealed that she was dismissed from several households for theft before being employed at the villa. Moreover, she has a history of providing testimony in legal matters in exchange for financial compensation. Richard's face darkened. That doesn't negate what she heard. Perhaps not, James interjected smoothly. But it does call into question her credibility, particularly when weighed against the official determination of the Earl's death by a qualified physician and the consistent testimony of numerous other witnesses. He produced a sheaf of documents. I took the liberty of gathering statements from the Earl's valet, the stable-master, and 3 other servants who were present at Briarwood on the night in question and the following morning. All confirm that the Earl announced his intention to ride early, was known to be drinking heavily, and was discovered on the grounds having apparently fallen from his horse. Sir Henry accepted these documents, reviewing them with evident interest. These appear to be in order. Furthermore, James continued, I have here a detailed statement from Dr. James Wilson, who examined the Earl's body and determined the cause of death to be consistent with a riding accident. Dr. Wilson specifically notes the pattern of injuries and their compatibility with a fall from horseback at speed. Rebecca watched in amazement as James systematically dismantled Richard's case. Each piece of evidence he presented had been gathered in the brief time since her confession, a testament to his resources and determination to protect her. This is absurd, Richard protested, his composure beginning to crack. The woman killed her husband. She admitted as much to her maid. According to one dubious witness whose testimony would not stand in any proper court, Lord Blackwood observed calmly. The magistrate's representative cleared his throat. In light of the conflicting evidence and the substantial documentation supporting the original determination of accidental death, I see no grounds for pursuing a criminal investigation at this time. Richard turned on him, his face mottled with rage. For you've been bought. The Duke has used his influence to— That is quite enough, Lord Richard, Sir Henry interrupted sharply. Such accusations are both unseemly and potentially libelous. Mr. Thornton rose, his expression stern. I assure you, my lord, my assessment is based solely on the legal merits of the evidence presented. Should you wish to pursue this matter further, you are welcome to appeal to my superiors, though I caution that making unfounded accusations against a peer of the realm might lead to consequences you would find unpleasant. Richard's gaze darted between the assembled faces, finding no allies. His solicitor was studiously avoiding eye contact, clearly recognizing that their case had collapsed. As for the matter of the inheritance, Sir Henry continued, having reviewed all documents pertaining to the entailment, I find no grounds to invalidate the Countess's claim to Briarwood. She was the Earl's lawful wife at the time of his death, and the estate passes to her under the terms of both the entailment and his personal will. He closed the folder before him with finality. Furthermore, Lord Richard, I must express my grave concern about your methods in pursuing this claim. Attempting to malign the reputation of a widow through such questionable means is beneath the dignity of your position. Rebecca sat in stunned silence, scarcely able to believe that the threat hanging over her for 3 years had been so decisively neutralized. Beside her, James squeezed her hand gently, his expression one of quiet triumph. Richard, his face now ashen with fury and humiliation, glared at Rebecca. This isn't over, he hissed. Your secrets will come to light eventually. Before anyone could respond to this threat, Lord Blackwood spoke, his voice deceptively casual. Speaking of secrets, Lord Richard, I've recently been in communication with a certain gentleman in Brussels who has quite interesting tales to tell about your activities there last year. Something about forged promissory notes and a married countess. Most fascinating. I'm sure society would find these stories most enlightening. Richard blanched, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I suggest, Lord Blackwood continued pleasantly, that you consider relocating to your hunting lodge in Scotland for an extended period. The Highland air is said to be excellent for clearing one's mind and adjusting one's priorities. The threat was unmistakable despite its polite delivery. Richard looked as though he might protest, but after a moment of tense silence, he gathered his papers and stormed from the room, his solicitor hurrying after him. As the door closed behind them, Rebecca released a shaky breath. "Is it truly over?" James nodded. "Richard won't risk further accusations, not with what Edward has on him. And without his claims, there is no case against you." Sir Henry approached them, a kind smile on his weathered face. "Countess Stuart, I believe congratulations are in order, not just for your vindication today, but for your engagement as well. The Duke is a fortunate man." "The fortune is entirely mine, Sir Henry," James replied, his eyes on Rebecca, "and I intend to ensure the Countess never again has cause to doubt her security or happiness." The aftermath of the meeting saw Rebecca and James returning to her townhouse, where Elizabeth and Sophie awaited news with barely contained anxiety. When Rebecca announced their victory, the relief in the room was palpable. "It's truly over?" Sophie asked, tears in her eyes. "Thanks to James and Lord Blackwood, yes." Rebecca turned to her fiancé with wonder. "I still scarcely believe how quickly you assembled the evidence needed to counter Richard's claims." James smiled. "Money and influence have their uses, particularly when deployed in a righteous cause." "And the letters?" she asked. "The ones Richard claimed were incriminating, were, as Mr. Thornton noted, vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways. Without Signorina Rossi's testimony to provide context, they proved nothing." Elizabeth, who had been watching her friend closely, moved to embrace her. "You're free, Rebecca. Truly free to live and love without fear." The realization washed over Rebecca like a cleansing wave. For the first time since that terrible night at Briarwood, she could look to the future without dread. The secret that had weighed so heavily upon her had been shared and accepted by the man she loved, and the threat of exposure neutralized. "There's just one matter left to address," James said, taking her hand. "Briarwood requires significant investment to restore it to its former glory. I propose we begin those improvements immediately as our wedding gift to each other." Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "You wish to live at Briarwood, not Harrington House?" "I thought we might divide our time between the two, Harrington House for the London season and Briarwood for the remainder of the year." His expression grew serious. "Unless you prefer to sell Briarwood and leave those memories behind entirely." Rebecca considered the question thoughtfully. "No," she decided. "Briarwood deserves a chance at new memories, happier ones, and perhaps in time the sound of children's laughter in those halls." The joy that lit James's face at these words confirmed that she had made the right choice, not just about Briarwood, but about trusting this man with her heart and her future. Their wedding took place 6 weeks later, in the small church on the Briarwood estate. It was a quiet affair by aristocratic standards, attended only by close friends and those servants who had remained loyal through the difficult years. Elizabeth served as Rebecca's matron of honor, while Lord Blackwood stood as James's best man. As Rebecca walked down the aisle toward her future husband, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terrified young bride she had been, to the desperate widow fleeing to Italy, to a woman who had found the courage to face her past and embrace a future built on truth and love. Each step, however painful, had led her here. James watched her approach, his expression one of undisguised adoration. In his eyes, Rebecca saw not the notorious Duke who had first approached her at the Ashford ball, but the man who had proven himself worthy of her trust and her heart, a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her more deeply for it. "Dearly beloved," the vicar began as they stood before him, hands joined and hearts united. In that sacred moment, as they pledged themselves to one another, Rebecca silently released the last vestiges of fear that had defined her life for so long. The past would always be a part of her story, but it no longer had the power to determine her future. As they emerged from the church as husband and wife, the sun broke through the clouds that had threatened rain all morning, bathing Briarwood's grounds in golden light, a fitting symbol for the new beginning they had created together. "Are you happy, my love?" James asked softly as they stood receiving the congratulations of their guests. Rebecca looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such joy. "More than I ever believed possible," she replied, "and more than I ever dared hope for." In the months and years that followed, Briarwood was indeed transformed, not just physically as James's resources restored the estate to its former splendor and beyond, but spiritually, as the shadows of the past gave way to the light of new beginnings. 2 years after their wedding, the sound of a child's laughter echoed through those once silent halls, fulfilling Rebecca's hope for Briarwood's future. Their daughter, Victoria Elizabeth, was soon joined by a brother, Charles Edward, completing the family that both Rebecca and James had once thought beyond their reach. London society eventually tired of speculating about the remarkable transformation of the Duke of Harrington from notorious rake to devoted husband and father. Those closest to the couple, however, understood that it was not a transformation but a revelation of the man James had always been beneath the cynical facade, and of the love Rebecca had never stopped believing in, despite the cruelties she had endured. On warm summer evenings, they would often sit together on the terrace overlooking Briarwood's gardens, watching their children play among the roses, while discussing the day's events or their plans for the future. "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked on one such evening, the 5th anniversary of their wedding. "Taking on my burdens, my past." James took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm with the same tenderness he had shown since the beginning of their love. "Not for a single moment. You gave me far more than I gave you, a reason to be better than I was, a family I cherish above all else, and a love I never believed existed outside of poetry." As the sun set over Briarwood, painting the sky in hues of gold and rose, Rebecca leaned against her husband's shoulder, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life founded on honesty, redemption, and the transformative power of love that sees beyond masks and mistakes to the truth of the heart within. For the mysterious countess who had arrived at a London ball amid gossip and murmurs, and the relentless duke who had asked, "Who is she?" had discovered together the answer to a far more important question, not who they had been, but who they could become when brave enough to reveal their true selves to each other. And in that revelation, they had found not just passion or companionship, but the rarest and most precious gift of all, a love strong enough to heal the wounds of the past and build a future neither had dared to imagine. The end. Dear listener, in the drawing rooms of London society, they believed they knew James and Rebecca completely, a rake who would never change, a widow with secrets too dark to share. How easily we place others in boxes, don't we? How comfortably we decide their stories have already been written. But what truly transforms Rebecca and James's tale from mere romance to profound wisdom is this: they refuse to let others define their possibilities. The most revolutionary act in their story isn't their passion or even their courage. It's their magnificent defiance against the notion that people cannot fundamentally change, cannot begin again, cannot surprise even themselves with who they might yet become. Isn't this the unspoken battle many of you face each day? The silent struggle against a world that attempts to diminish your horizons simply because of the number of candles on your birthday cake. How splendidly you prove them wrong. With every new interest you pursue, every bold fashion choice you make, every unexpected opinion you express, you shatter these artificial limitations. Like Rebecca stepping confidently into that ballroom despite the whispers, you claim your rightful space in a world that would prefer to render you invisible. Society tells a story about aging that is tragically incomplete. It speaks of what is lost, but remains stubbornly silent about what is gained. The exquisite freedom to care less about judgment and more about joy. The hard-won ability to distinguish between genuine connection and mere appearance. The courage to finally become who you truly are, rather than who others expected you to be. This is the true inheritance of your years, not diminishment, but emancipation. So wear that vibrant color that makes your eyes shine. Voice that unconventional thought you've been holding back. Pursue that unexpected passion that makes your heart race. Declare your love without reservation. Start that ambitious project everyone says is too much at your age. The most powerful message of Rebecca and James's journey is that our final chapters can be our most authentic, our most daring, our most truly alive. The greatest adventure of your life may not lie behind you in memory, but ahead of you in glorious possibility. Tonight, as you close your eyes, remember, it is never too late to surprise the world with who you might yet become.